Welcome back to Music Free Static. I hope you're having a fabulous day. And have you ever had those things or something in your life that brought you joy that you just loved and you just totally forgot about? Yeah, that happened to me like so many others. And then I realized, oh, wait, these things still exist. And for me, it was documentaries. I know the middle aged man likes watching documentaries. I'm shocked. Yes, no, it's I like documentaries. Okay, I used to watch them all the time, but it had been years since I've watched any really, and I don't know exactly what happened. Why did I stop watching them? Now, some of it is fairly easy. I just didn't have time, right? Because I had other things going on, and they were just sort of a lower priority thing for me, right? I kind of, I don't know, it was several years ago now where I kind of just stopped watching TV, right? Oh, I'll put on streams in the background and I'll put on like YouTube videos in the background. I rarely just watch them, right? Where I just sit and I will watch this, right? No, I'll usually put them on and then do something else while listening to it or whatever. And because of that, I just stopped watching a lot of those things that I would watch all the time, right? I mean, I stopped watching football, I stopped watching just reruns and things like that. And I think my life is generally better for it. But I also have stopped watching documentaries. And it's weird because so many of those things were just cool, right? Now, here's the thing. I love to learn, okay? I love learning about new things. Sometimes I just like learning about things I've known about, right? So sometimes it's just, oh, I want to hear more about the Roman Empire. Okay. I know it's a little meme worthy, but sure. All right. I like I like swords and weaponry and medieval martial arts and things like that. So yeah, watching uh, a documentary about castles or armor or things like that can be cool, right? I watched this fascinating one years ago. It was a scientific look at the Battle of Agincourt, where it was I think it was Henry V had invaded France, and now he's leaving, and the French are pursuing him. And to keep his what's left of his army from being destroyed, he sets up at this location in Agincourt as the French army, led by their nobles in full plate on horseback, right? Their knights and other armored men at arms attack, right? Now, what was fascinating about this, okay, was they went through and were doing a forensic analysis of the battlefield and the armor and things like that, right? Right, because one of the tales handed down about one of the tales handed down about the battle was that, yeah, the English longbowmen were devastating, and they typically were if you were not wearing plate armor, okay? Because what we've seen, especially in modern research, and you can go to Todd Cutler's YouTube channel, their Arrows versus Armor series is fascinating. But one of the things that came out of that, the story of the Battle of Agincourt, was that when the French knights fell in the armor, they couldn't get up. So the documentary went through and did some pressure tests. They had samples of the mud from Agincourt and realized that yes, there is a level of suction in that mud that, yeah, it takes a lot of pressure to be able to pull out an iron plate. Okay, which surprisingly enough is kind of what you're wearing when you're wearing armor. Iron or steel, right? Most of it was steel at that point. But it was that was fascinating to me, right? They had some stuff talking about crowd control and all this other stuff, right? I love that. And I don't remember, that might have been an episode on History's Mysteries or something. It was on History Channel. I used to watch a lot of that stuff. I suppose the other thing that stopped me from watching a lot of that stuff is I got rid of cable. So, you know, no longer have the History Channel and stuff like that. Does History Channel still show documentaries these days, or is it all just reality TV? That's kind of where it was trending, right? But other things I love to watch were some animal documentaries and things like that. Not that I am like overly into animal and wildlife, but some of it, especially at the time, I was watching a lot of Croc Hunter, right? Steve Irwin and his various shows. And man, those were fun. Okay. Yeah, there were some things that was a little bit cringeworthy, right? But overall, it was fascinating. And the heck, I can't remember. Oh, I was watching Pearlescent Moon stream the other day, and she was chatting with Gemini Tay, and Gem was talking about how one of her life goals is to go to the Australia Zoo that Steve Irwin, his father founded as a reptile sanctuary, and then Steve Irwin and his wife, they grew it into a full zoo and animal hospital and all of this stuff. Okay. And I realized how much, or I remembered how much I loved watching those things. So I started Googling around on YouTube and found a series from Animal Planet from a couple of years ago. It's, with the cringeworthy title of Crikey, it's the Irwins, right? But it follows the Irwin family, Steve having died, of course, tragically years ago, but follows the Irwin family as they are doing stuff in the zoo. Okay. And it was fun. It didn't quite have the magic, perhaps, of Steve just wandering around the outback, or what was the one I did catch a segment on the other day? Oh, of him walking through Arizona, probably, and looking at rattlesnakes, right? And by looking at, I mean pulling them out of their safe space and dangling them by the tail so you could look at the snake, right? Because that's what he did. He was just a nut job. But he had a passion for animals, and that came through, and I loved watching that stuff. And the other ones I've seen recently, and I don't typically go in for biographies, okay? Biopics, things like that. Not typically my jam. That's not to say I don't watch a few of them, however, and there are a couple of good ones that came out recently that are on Disney Plus. One is I think it's called Magic Man, if I'm remembering right. But it looks at the life of Jim Henson. And that was really fun, right? Just all of the weirdness that came to be. It answered a question I didn't know I had. Okay. So, like a lot of people my age, right? I grew up watching Sesame Street back when it was still good. Okay. I grew up watching Sesame Street and all of these different segments and different things, and it was a lot of fun. But there were a number of those segments that were just weird. Okay. There's one, and anyone who's grown up watching this will immediately have this stupid thing stuck in their head forever. But there was a segment of a pinball machine, and it would count up to 12. It had a very, very catchy tune, right? It was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, right? You know this one, right? You know this. It's now stuck in your head forever. I'm sorry. But yes, but halfway through, right, they would count and like 8, and something would happen, or they'd be through 7, right, and they'd have other, right. And this was just weird and bizarre. Why the heck, or what's going on with this? And I thought part of it was, and part of it probably was, bright colors and music and stuff to keep the little munchkins entertained. Yeah, probably. But one of the things I learned was that Jim Henson, as a filmmaker, really preferred what they refer to as experimental filmmaking. He liked weird, and he liked doing weird. And so with Sesame Street, yes, they had the little segments of the Muppets and the whatever, right? They'd have the guest stars and all of these different things. But a lot of those interstitial segments were just Jim Henson getting to experiment, do those weird things that he's wanted to do, and still have this entertaining and educational thing. I didn't realize I had really wanted to know the answer to this. I didn't even realize there was a question there that I wanted answered. I just remember saying, oh, that's weird. Okay. But learning that, oh yeah, there's a reason why. Because, yeah, he wanted to Muppets and puppetry because it was fun, but he wanted to do all of that experimental stuff. And that was one of his stipulations, apparently, for doing Sesame Street, was that he could do some experimental shorts and things that he was able to integrate into Sesame Street because of how they did things. It was also fun watching the early days of Henson with his puppets and seeing, oh yeah, Kermit would just straight up shoot people, right? The early sketches and early segments that he was doing were very adult. Okay, I'm not talking like pornographic adult. I'm talking about they were not for kids. Okay, I think they even said he did a stint on Saturday Night Live, which surprised the heck out of me. But yeah, it was fascinating to go through and see some of this stuff, see how the Muppet Show came to be and how that translated into movies and all of this other stuff, right? It was fascinating, right? The other one I watched was on John Williams and his life, or more specifically, less his life and more of his music. Okay, John Williams, again, for people of a certain age, which definitely includes me, John Williams wrote the score to your childhood. Okay, his music was everywhere through the 80s and 90s. Okay. Whether it was Jaws or Close Encounters of the Third Kind, right? Star Wars or Indiana Jones and Jurassic Park and E.T., and things like Schindler's List and later Harry Potter, and right. The dude was I think he won, I think what he said, 5 Oscars for music. I was nominated like 60 times. It's something ridiculous, okay? And yes, as the man is approaching 90 plus now, I think, he's slowing down a little bit. And the torch has been passed to people like Michael Giacchino and Howard Shore, I think. And I remember Alan Silvestri was in there for a while, right? These people are now continuing that legacy of movie music. But he was a throwback to classic, I would say classical music, instrumental romantic era music, really, and then moving on into some of the more modern music. But in a lot of ways, he brought back that majesty to movies, or maybe even brought back is the wrong word, just brought it to movies. And there's a great line they're talking about it as he's doing this performance at the Hollywood Bowl, which has sort of become an annual tradition. And he says, look at this. We are filling this auditorium, and these are kids and adults, but they are coming to see an orchestral concert. Right? How many people out there are going to see an orchestra these days? Not many. Okay. There's certainly more people lining up to see Taylor Swift than they are to see the London Symphony Orchestra, right? Or the Boston Pops or something like that, right? It's just not part of our culture these days. Except when it comes to the music of John Williams. And moving on now, many of these other movie composers of movie music. Maybe I want to put it that way, because Williams wrote this music that just blew people's minds. And it also helped that he very quickly was tied to Steven Spielberg. Because Spielberg, after, I think, what did John Williams do for him? Was it Jaws? I think maybe the first movie he did for him. Might have been something else. But he says, no, every time I make a movie, I want John Williams to do the music. And it turns out Spielberg directed a lot of very good movies. And very popular movies. And so John Williams came along for the ride. Or hearing George Lucas, when he's looking for someone to write the score for Star Wars. And Lucas is looking for that big orchestral sound. And his friend, Steven Spielberg, says, hey, check out this dude, Johnny Williams. And Lucas is like, what, that jazz player? Right? Because John Williams at the time was known for being a jazz pianist. Okay? Not a fabulous one by most accounts. Good, and he says himself, I'm not the best piano player in the world, right? But he is very good at writing music. Right? So that all of this was just fascinating to see how all of this sort of started to lay out, and the impacts that his music had on later other musicians and movies in a lot of ways too. Right? I love seeing some of that stuff. But really what I love watching in documentaries is documentaries about weather and the natural power of the earth, weather, volcanoes, right? Stuff like that, earthquakes. All of that stuff fascinates me. I love to sit down and watch these things and see the power and the awesome majesty of nature, right? Because, yeah, it's great to study bears and crocodiles and all of this stuff, right? All that stuff like that I've talked about before with Steve Irwin and some of these other like animal things, right? But to see when nature decides that it doesn't need you around anymore, right? When you get these events, right? So the one I watched recently was a National Geographic documentary on Disney Plus that was a look back at the Christmas tsunami that hit the Indian Ocean back in, I don't know, was it 2005, 6, something like that? Early 2000s, okay? There was a massive earthquake, which happens. It was 9 something, close to a 9.0, something like that on the Richter scale. And, of course, it triggered this massive tsunami. Well, it hit and devastated so much of so many of the countries around the Indian Ocean. But it was the dawning of an age of cameras being everywhere, right? You think early 2000s, right? Cell phones are a thing now, but more than that, we're talking about cell phones that don't really have a lot of cameras, but camcorders and personal video is a thing, and there's a lot of it. A lot of people were having these, especially you talk some of these places in India or Sri Lanka that were tourist destinations, right? But watching what a lot of that weather did, or what a lot of that water did, might be a better way of looking at it, as these waves come in and seeing the devastation, but seeing the heroism as well, right? Because it's one thing to say, big wave, destroy much, okay, right? This is a huge wave. It wiped out lots of things. But seeing the people who would risk their own lives to save others, who, yes, they're hurt, they're injured, but they're also working to get other people who are injured onto evacuation helicopters and get them medical care and stuff like that. This was fascinating to watch. And that was a, I don't know, 5, 6 episode series. And it was just so amazing to watch, to see some of this footage. And then they went back and they're talking to the survivors, right? Here's somebody who survived this train in India that was derailed by the tsunami. And something like 2/3 of the passengers on that train died in the flooding. But to hear the account of this is what it was like as this water came in onto this train, it's fascinating. Okay. Just realize that, yeah, we're here. We think we're pretty dominant, and we are, right up until we actually get to see the full brunt of what weather and the titanic forces of the earth can unleash upon people. And it's crazy to see all of the stuff. And this is why I love learning these things, right? Now, I have no desire to be a meteorologist. I am not going to be a geologist, any of those types of things, right? I am not going to be studying volcanoes for a living, because as much as I like them, I don't like them that much. But I still love to see that, yeah, our world is not as peaceful and tranquil as we'd like to pretend, right? I live in an area of the world that is geographically stable, seismically stable. We have a small fault line that runs on the eastern side of the valley. The earthquakes that we get are extraordinarily minimal. Okay, so they just are. 1, 2 on the Richter scale, nothing. Right. These are the things that Californians just ignore. Right. I don't get hurricanes. Maybe once every few years, a small tornado will spin up, but that's just extraordinarily rare. And they're not large tornadoes because I live in a valley, and you don't have that space for the weather to really start spinning. The one thing we get is cold, and we get snow. But okay, it's cold, it's snow. Yeah, whatever. It's not that big a deal. Versus, hey, this place just is dealing with gale force winds and rain all of a sudden, right? With the so-called bomb cyclone that hit the northwest United States not too long ago, or something similar, high winds and rain hit England. But it was funny, I was talking to my son who's going to school up in the Pacific Northwest, and he says, yeah, the winds were a lot like a typical spring day back home. That put it into perspective for me, okay? Because while I live in a valley, most things are fine. But we know when it's spring, because spring is about a month or so, month and a half, where we get wind, and we get a lot of it, and it is, I'm not going to say it's constant because it dies down at night, but during the day, we get wind, and we'll get sustained 30, 40 mile an hour winds just all day, right? It's just okay, yeah, breezy. Okay. Beyond all of that, it's fascinating to see what can happen with the weather, or the natural volcanic actions of the planet, where it's like, okay, this volcano erupted, and now what? I remember watching video, what was it, Iceland, I think. It's 2 or 3 years ago. Iceland had a volcano that was erupting. Not unusual for Iceland. It happens, right? but it was in like a national park or something along those lines. They knew this volcano was here, and yeah, it just started to erupt. And because of the way modern society is, there were cameras on it and all this stuff, and being able to watch, like, oh yeah, here's the lava flows coming slowly this way, or here's all of this stuff, man. It's fascinating. I love to watch this stuff. And I totally forgot. I forgot that I like to watch this stuff, right? Because it had been years since I'd put on a documentary. If I'd wanted to watch something in the background, hey, there were streams or there were YouTube videos. Heck, later today, I will probably be watching all of the flood of episodes on YouTube from the Wildlife Minecraft SMP, right? Not the most educational content on earth, I will be the first to admit. But going back and looking at some of this stuff, and it's like, dude, this is amazing, right? Or there was History used to have a series called Modern Marvels, I think it was, that went through modern day things, right? Whether it was a dam or airplanes or certain specific types of airplanes or various types of big equipment. It's like, here's how this stuff works, right? Fascinating stuff. Again, I'm never going to dive into this in depth, but just seeing some of these little things, like, oh, this is great. And I've been listening to some podcasts recently of that are more like philosophical, right? Because I've talked before, I love like political theory, I love political science, but hearing some of the philosophical arguments and thought process behind different things, not political podcasts that says, Trump is evil or Biden is evil or they're all idiots. Okay, no, that's not true. I do listen to a podcast where pretty much they're all idiots is a standard theme through the podcast, okay? I'm libertarian, they're all nuts. Okay? But but listening to some of these discussions of what brought people to various ideas, what are some of their experiences, and some of that stuff is, again, it triggers that part of my brain. It's like, you know what? I do like learning, and I have missed this. Not that I want to go back to college, okay, and get another degree or something like that, okay? I'm done with that. But I do like getting these little nuggets of information, right? These little bits of learning that's like, that, okay, maybe my knowledge isn't deep, okay? But yes, I am picking up things. I am learning things. I am seeing these things on, yeah, sometimes it's weather, sometimes it's volcanoes, sometimes it's animals or biographies or history or whatever. But it's these little things that bring a little bit of joy into my life that I had totally forgotten about. So as I wind up here, I want to ask you, what are those things that were just that sparked joy in your life that for one reason or another have faded? Okay, and I'm not talking about necessarily, oh, I used to play with action figures as a kid and I don't do that anymore. But something that maybe in your early adult life or whatever that was just, oh yeah, this was just part of my life and it disappeared. And again, common things, work, kids, right, all of that stuff limit the time you get to spend on some of this stuff. But what are some of those aspects of your life that, yeah, I love doing these things and I just forgot? And let me know. And maybe this is a chance for you to rediscover some of those joys. And let me know. Drop a comment here on YouTube or Spotify, and let's, celebrate those joys in our lives. And I say this um, hoping that maybe we can all be a little bit more joyful. And until next time, be excellent to each other. This is Music Free Static signing off.